Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. And I'd like to thank you all for joining us here this afternoon. I'm also pleased to be joined by my colleague, Minister Mona Fortier, and of course, Commissioner Brenda Lucki from the RCMP. Today, all of the people of Canada join with the people of Nova Scotia in their grief for the senseless acts of violence that were committed in and around Portapique over the past weekend. I'd like to begin by expressing my deepest sympathies and the sympathies of all Canadians with the families and the loved ones of the deceased. And as we become more aware about the 18 innocent lives that were lost in this terrible tragedy, we will learn the full scope of this terrible crime and the devastating impact that it will have on communities and families in Nova Scotia and across Canada. A nurse, a teacher, correction officers, a serving police officer, parents, neighbors, and friends. The full scope of this tragedy and the 18 innocent lives that were lost will be remembered throughout Canada's history. One of the particularly tragic elements of this terrible event was the death of Constable Heidi Stevenson, who was killed answering the call to duty while bravely responding to this tragic incident. Constable Stevenson was a 23-year veteran of the RCMP, admired, respected, and beloved by her colleagues and her community. I also want to acknowledge Constable Chad Morrison, who is recovering today from gunshot wounds that he suffered in responding bravely to this event. I think all Canadians are grateful that we have people like Constable Stevenson, Constable Morrison, men and women serving in law enforcement across the country who answered the call, who rushed towards the danger, who put their lives on the line. And it is important to remember that they are heroes every day, not just made heroes by this terrible tragedy, but every day for their service. And we will remember their sacrifice. The Nova Scotia RCMP are actively investigating almost 16 crime scenes, and they will be releasing information as it becomes available. I can tell you from experience that in these incredibly complex and tragic crimes, what is known now will be added to. The information will be incomplete. And the RCMP are doing an extraordinary job of tracking the evidence, getting the facts, dealing with families who are grieving an incredible loss. And they are dealing with all of that while they mourn the loss of a beloved colleague. Last night, I had this opportunity to speak with MPs from Nova Scotia who I serve with, Lenore Zahn, Darren Fisher, Bernadette Jordan. And I've asked them all to help us understand how the Government of Canada can best support their communities at this tragic time. And we will continue to work together to get through this. We will continue to support the RCMP in the important and vital work that they are doing to get Canadians the answers that they seek. I've also had the opportunity this morning to speak with Nova Scotia's Attorney General and Minister of Justice, Mark Furry. Mark and I used to work together when he was then serving with the RCMP, and he spoke about his recollection of Constable Stevenson. He was involved in her recruitment and hiring and training, and it was very apparent to me how deeply, emotionally, and impactful this tragedy has been for him as well. And so I would like to take this opportunity to sincerely thank the members of Nova Scotia's RCMP and the Commissioner who serve our communities every day. As Canadians, we have no greater responsibility than the safety of our communities and our kids. I'd also like to take this opportunity to express my heartfelt condolences to the people of Portapique, to the region of central Nova Scotia that has been so deeply impacted by the lives that have been stolen in this senseless act of violence. And I'd like now to turn to Commissioner Lucki to make her remarks. Commissioner.
Good afternoon. Our hearts are broken. My heart is broken. a senseless act of violence unprecedented in our country has occurred. I want to thank all of the people across Canada and across the world who have shared their expressions of grief, sorrow, support, and condolences as we mourn the loss of Constable Heidi Stevenson, as well as families across Nova Scotia and their loved ones. And we are all families. Heidi served in her community. Her children went to school in the community, as does Chad Morrison. In the face of this unprecedented crime, it's going to be very long and very complicated. It's not going to be gone through overnight. As the minister said, there's at least 15 crime scenes. But our focus must and will be to put names to the victims, to the heroes, to the people who serve their community. And again, on behalf of the RCMP family, I want to thank the minister, the media, and all the Canadians for such a tremendous support throughout this. And it means so much to us. I will end by saying Canadians are resilient. COVID showed us our resiliency. This event will again show our resiliency, and we will get through this. We'll get through this together. Thank you.
Merci, le ministre Blair, et merci, commissaire Lucki, d'être avec nous aujourd'hui. Aujourd'hui, nous partageons cette grande peine, un deuil avec les Néo-Écossais. En fin de semaine, des actes de violence insensés ont été commis à Portapique et dans les environs. Je suis de tout cœur avec les familles qui ont reçu le pire appel de leur vie hier. Il n'y a pas de mots pour décrire ces terribles pertes et cette terrible tragédie. J'offre mes sincères condoléances ainsi que celles de tous les Canadiennes et les Canadiens aux familles et aux proches des victimes. Voici les informations que nous pouvons partager présentement. Au moins 18 vies précieuses ont été tuées, dont une agente de la GRC. L'agente Heidi Stevenson de la GRC a été tuée dans l'exercice de ses fonctions alors qu'elle répondait courageusement à cet incident. Cet héros, l'agente Stevenson, était une vétérane de 23 ans avec la GRC. Nous souhaitons également un rétablissement rapide à l'autre agent de la GRC qui a été blessé, l'agent Chad Morrison. Il est encore trop tôt pour dire si le nombre de personnes décédées est définitif, qu'à la portée de cette situation est toujours en cours d'évaluation. Vous savez, on a perdu des êtres chers, des parents, des infirmières, une infirmière, des personnes qui contribuaient à leur communauté. Et nous sommes de tout cœur avec ces communautés. La GRC de la Nouvelle-Écosse enquête activement sur toutes les scènes de crime et divulguera les renseignements dès qu'elles seront disponibles. À mesure que nous nous en prenons davantage sur ce qui est passé en Nouvelle-Écosse, je demande aux Canadiennes et aux Canadiens d'être unis dans le deuil avec ces communautés qui sont durement frappées. Je tiens à remercier sincèrement les membres de la GRC de la Nouvelle-Écosse qui servent courageusement leur communauté tous les jours. En tant que gouvernement, nous n'avons pas de plus importante responsabilité que de s'assurer de la sécurité des Canadiennes et des Canadiens. Encore une fois, je présente mes sincères condoléances aux habitants de Portapique et aux familles de ceux et celles qui ont perdu la vie dans un acte de violence insensé. Merci.
Thank you, Minister. We'll now start taking questions, starting with 3 questions on the phone. On va commencer à prendre les questions en commençant par le téléphone. 3 questions au téléphone avant de se tourner vers la salle. 1 question, 1 follow-up, une question, un suivi. Opérateur?
Thank you, merci. Please press star 1 at this time if you have a question. S'il vous plaît, appuyez sur étoile 1 maintenant pour poser une question. The first question, la première question, Steve Scherer, Reuters. Please go ahead, your line is open. À vous la parole, votre ligne est ouverte.
Hello, yes. I wanted to ask, I know that the other press conference, one in Nova Scotia, indicated that the death toll may not be final. I was wondering if you have an idea of how many people may be missing right now.
At this time, we don't have an exact number. We just know that there are certain scenes that have not been processed, and because of fire, it's not easily apparent if all the people have been accounted for.
Okay, can I follow up?
Yes.
My follow-up would be: have you been able to find out whether the attacker left any sort of note at all before going on this rampage?
No note has been found to date.
Thank you. Next question on the phone.
Thank you, merci. The next question, la prochaine question, Daniel Leblanc from Globe and Mail. Please go ahead. Your line is open. À vous la parole.
Hello, it's a question for Mr. Blair. The Prime Minister has talked about legislation on gun control. There's also been raised the possibility of going through the legislative process. Can you give us a sense of whether you're still looking at a possible order in Council to enact the promised ban on assault weapons?
Our government's been very clear in its commitment to strengthen gun control in Canada, and we have been working diligently on the best way to achieve the strengthening of both our regulations and the legislation pertaining to firearms and making Canada a safer place. But today, quite frankly, we focus on the grieving families of this terrible tragedy and provide support to the RCMP in the conduct of their investigation. We'll continue to do the work of Parliament, but today our focus really is on that support that is so necessary for the communities, for people who have lost loved ones, and from the RCMP who are doing very important work today.
Monsieur Leblanc,
a follow-up for Commissioner Lucki. Can you give us a sense of the firearms that were used, whether or not they were registered, whether they were, properly obtained, and give us a sense of what you know on that front? There
is still a lot of work to be done in regards to the various firearms that have been used in this crime spree, and I don't have that information. We will be doing a lot of tracing. We'll be doing a lot of background work into that, but to date, we don't have that information.
Thank you, Commissioner. Operator, next question on the phone.
Thank you, merci. The next question, la prochaine question, is from Jim Brunskill from the Canadian Press. Please go ahead. Your line is open. À vous la parole. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Yes, for Minister Blair. Do you have a timeline on when the gun control measures will be brought in? There are renewed calls today from people who would like to see these public interest measures in place.
As I've indicated, Jim, we have been working very diligently on fulfilling our commitment to Canadians to bring forward regulation and legislation to strengthen gun control in this country. As I think all Canadians are aware, there has been a fairly significant interruption of Parliament and parliamentary processes over the past week in response to the virus, but that doesn't in any way lessen our commitment to bringing forward effective measures that will keep communities safe and as we have committed to do, strengthen gun laws in this country. But we are also working through complex parliamentary processes, and much of that is resolving itself today.
Jim, follow-up
for Commissioner Lucki. And forgive me if this has been addressed, but was the individual involved in these terrible acts, was he known to police, to RCMP, in any... I know he was well known in the community, but was he known to police in any way before these acts?
The subject in question was not well known to police.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll now start taking questions in the room, starting with Catherine from CBC.
Hi there. I think this question is for Mr. Blair, but Commissioner Lucki, if you'd like to comment as well. The news conference we just heard from the RCMP in Nova Scotia referenced 2 additional investigations by the Serious Incident Response Team. We're trying to understand, were there civilians or other members of the police who might have been fired upon in this incident? It wasn't clear who these incidents involved. Can you just shed a bit of light on whether or not...
Whenever there's a use of force by police, the independent investigators of any province will do an investigation. So it's based on use of force by the RCMP. And that's all I can comment on. There's 2 specific incidents that they've been requested to investigate.
But you can't tell the public that no civilians were, no bystanders. You're not ruling that out?
No, it's with the RCMP. It's not, no innocent civilians have been harmed in these use of force incidents.
If I could just squeeze one more question in there. A question that's been raised is about the fact that while there was information sent out on Twitter, there was no sort of public alert sent out through the telephone over the course of this incident. And I wonder if that's something that you're looking into now, if you have any questions about whether that might have helped preserve public safety.
I do say that in any incident such as this, we always have to look back at what we did. Nobody can lose their life in vain, and Heidi will not lose her life in vain, nor will the 17 other victims. We have to ensure that whatever happened there, if there's always going to be a better way to do things. And so if we can take this and move forward and find a better way to advise the public. But I have to say, in these incidents, they are so dynamic and they are so quick. And it was just over 12 hours that all of this took place, and it was there was a lot of 15 different crime scenes. So you can imagine the dynamic nature of this. But again, we look at all the criminal side, and then of course we look at sort of the administrative side of all of that to say, what could we have done better to make Canadians safer? Because that is ultimately our goal.
Ian Woods, CTV.
Ian Woods, CTV News. Minister Blair, with respect to the victims and not to take away from them, I do want to return to gun control legislation. Following the attack in New Zealand last year, the New Zealand government was very swift in working to reduce the number of guns that they had in their communities, assault weapons. Likewise, Australia did the same thing following a mass shooting there in 1995, moved quite quickly. You said it's still on the table, it's still on the agenda, but just exactly how and when is this going to be brought up, and in this new reduced COVID parliament that we have?
Yeah, there are a number of significant steps, and what we have previously indicated is our intention to strengthen gun control legislation. We intend to bring forward both regulation and legislation that will enable us to prohibit military-style assault weapons. We've also are working on new legislation that will strengthen gun storage rules to prevent the diversion of firearms into the hands of people that would commit crimes with them, and to reduce the incidence of smuggling of firearms across the border. We've also are intending to bring forward legislation to introduce what are sometimes referred to as red flag laws for individuals who represent a significant risk to themselves or to others, to ensure that they don't have access to firearms and to suspend temporarily their ability to acquire firearms. That work has been continuing. We are highly motivated by our commitment to keep Canadians safe. There have been far too many incidents of gun violence in our country, and we are working hard to make sure that we do put the measures in place that significantly reduce those incidents and keep people safe. Of course, we're deeply impacted by the terrible crimes that have taken place over the past 36 hours, but at the same time, I think it's very important to allow the RCMP to conduct their investigation, to gather the evidence and the facts. And our public policy should be evidence-based and will be evidence-based. And so we will support the RCMP in the conduct of their investigation. I think we've made it very clear our commitment to strengthen gun laws in this country, and we are working on doing that. The actual schedule for bringing forward that legislation, that is still to be determined, simply because we are in somewhat uncertain times in Parliament, but it doesn't in any way imply that we are any less committed to taking the steps that are necessary to keep Canadians safe, to strengthen our gun laws, and to do those things which Canadians expect of us and which are necessary to maintain safety and reduce gun violence in our communities.
Thank you. Commissioner Lucki, condolences to you and the force. I just want to ask, the suspect had a mock RCMP vehicle and was wearing RCMP paraphernalia. How does someone obtain this, put it together? Do we watch for this, and was he on our radar?
For that, he wasn't on our radar, as far as we know. But there's a lot of investigative steps that have already been followed to trace all of that back and how it did happen and how it could occur. Some of it, most of which we think is replica. It wasn't actually an RCMP vehicle, but it was made to look identical to one. And we will trace back every part of that vehicle to find out how that happened, as well as with the uniforms. Thank you.
Hi, Tim Noam, iPolitics. I just got to say that I'm really sorry for your losses and also to the people of Nova Scotia. With regard to the firearm, although you might not, and I know that in previous shootings that the police have not released details of the firearm that was used, partly because of a trial, which there isn't going to be one here, and continuing investigation, but I'm just wondering, without actually specifying a make or a model, could you say, inform us whether this weapon or weapons were restricted or prohibited, or were they non-restricted? And did the shooter have a firearm license?
With regards to the various weapons used, what we will do is, because there's 15 different crime scenes, and despite what the suspect may or may not have had, we have to determine at each location what weapon was used, determine if if it was a long arm or if it was a handgun, and until we know exactly the cause of each death, we're not in a position to say what types of weapons that the suspect was in possession of. There's still a lot of scenes to process, and we're not sure that what we may have right in front of our eyes is usually not what ends up happening. So we have to make sure that we are, as Chief Superintendent Leather said, we are conducting searches. There's still some searches to be done and to put some of those pieces together.
Right. I think I understand some of that you have to determine and establish that each and all of these weapons were used in or not in the shootings. But with regard to the firearm license, I wouldn't think that anything investigative would hinge on that. If you could tell us whether or not that individual did have or did not have a firearm license.
Tim, as we've indicated, the RCMP are in the earliest hours and days of this investigation, and it's a complex one. And I think it's quite appropriate for them to be careful about the release of information until they've had the opportunity to verify it and confirm it. And so it is, I think, inappropriate. And the Commissioner would quite naturally be very reluctant to reveal details of that investigation until it is complete. And so I would urge Canadians to be patient with the RCMP as they do a very difficult but very important job for us in getting all the facts, in confirming their evidence, making sure that all of the steps to preserve that evidence are taken. Canadians deserve answers. The families and the victims of these terrible crimes deserve accurate answers. And so let us be patient while the RCMP conducts their investigation, confirms their evidence, and then I am absolutely confident they'll be transparent and forthcoming with that once that important work has been done.
Okay, I understand that. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I will now turn back to the phone. 3 questions au téléphone, opérateur.
Thank you. Merci. The next question, la prochaine question, the Dylan Robertson from Winnipeg Free Press. Please go ahead. Your line is open. À vous la parole.
I want to express my condolences, and I don't mean to distract from this tragedy, but I want to ask Minister Blair about the situation in our federal institutions with COVID. As far as I can tell, you haven't done any interviews since the pandemic hit the jails. we've seen ministers with less important portfolios show up at press conferences with a hashtag going around, "Where is Blair?" And I'm just wondering what you've been doing to keep abreast of the situation with COVID and prisoners.
All right, I've been here every single day, actually, and working very closely with all of my officials, including Commissioner Kelly, who I've spoken to as most recently as this morning, about almost a daily conversation with our correction officials. I can assure Canadians that we have been taking a number of very significant steps to ensure the health and safety of the inmate population who we are responsible for. Both Corrections Canada and our parole board have been working diligently for individuals who are eligible to be released and do not represent a significant threat to public safety, that they have been working to make sure that those individuals are considered for early release, and literally hundreds of people have in fact been placed back in the community, but that's done in a very careful and supervised way because public safety is our first priority. Within the institutions themselves, our Correction Services Canada officials have been working very closely with Public Health Canada and with provincial public health authorities to ensure that all of the measures that are necessary to protect our inmate populations are being taken, and that includes issuing personal protective equipment to both correction officers and the inmates in those institutions, that proper social isolation and social distancing measures are being taken. In all of the institutions where the virus is present, there have been essentially lockdowns put in place to allow people to be isolated and distanced from others who are effective. In addition, medical services are being provided and support is being provided to those who are suffering from this illness. I want to assure Canadians we take our responsibility to the safety of those inmates very, very seriously, but also to the safety of our communities. Our Correction Services and Parole Board have been working very diligently with public health officials to protect that vulnerable population and take the steps necessary to ensure that we provide that protection, and where the illness is present, that people receive the care and treatment and support that they need.
And Minister, how many inmates have been released due to COVID-19, and how many have been transferred to hospitals?
Okay, my understanding is that those who have required treatment in hospitals have been transferred there. The Commissioner advises me that many of the people that have received that treatment are now back in the institutions, having recovered, although there are a number of individuals still receiving treatment in hospital. With respect to the release of prisoners, approximately 600 people become eligible for consideration for parole and release, and the parole board has been working very diligently through those release provisions. As well, there are some individuals who are eligible for exceptional consideration for release as a result of medical conditions, those, for example, experiencing a complex pregnancy. And so those measures have been taken. I don't have a precise number of the people that have been entered into a community-based parole during this crisis, but I can tell you Correction Services Canada and the Parole Board of Canada have been working very, very hard to make sure that people who need additional protections and considerations are given such, and at the same time they're applying their always due diligence in ensuring that people who are released in circumstances that allow for safe reintegration back into community.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre Opérateur. Prochaine question.
Thank you, merci. The next question is from Charlie Pinkerton from iPolitics. Please go ahead. Your line is open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Hi there. This is for Minister Blair. Just wondering to clarify something. In whatever form we see Parliament take as it deals with the COVID-19 pandemic, will there be room for gun control legislation to be introduced, or will it have to wait until Parliament returns to normal sittings?
It is my intention to bring forward that legislation as quickly as possible, but that has been our intention. There has been an interruption in Parliament as a result of the COVID-19 provisions that have been put in place in Parliament. But at the very first opportunity, it is my intention to bring forward the measures that will fulfill our commitment to Canadians to strengthen gun control in Canada.
Okay, and your government has said that about a few pieces of legislation, and there's certain other priorities, including things like banning conversion therapy and making changes to medical assistance in dying. Would this legislation be put ahead of that on the list of priorities?
No, quite frankly, all of those things are priorities, and we're working diligently on being prepared to bring that before Parliament at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you. One last question on the phone.
Thank you, merci. The next question is from Jim Brunskill from the Canadian Press. La parole, votre ligne est ouverte. Please go ahead.
Yes, Minister Blair, just to follow up on Dylan's question about prisoners. I realize you said you didn't have exact numbers, but can you give us a ballpark number of those who are susceptible to COVID-19 who have been released from the federal system to the community? Is it dozens? You mentioned hundreds were eligible, but could you just narrow that down a little bit more for us, please?
Well, there have been, over the past 6 weeks, hundreds of people who have been eligible and received approval from the parole board for release. A number of those are people who were particularly vulnerable. There are a number of measures as well. I think it's important to understand the context of the federal inmate population. First of all, there are about 14,000 people in our federal institutions. Almost a quarter of them are serving life sentences and not eligible for parole. And therefore, we are taking the steps necessary for those who are not eligible for parole. And that includes almost half the population who are serving sentences for very serious violent crimes. And so we are taking the steps that are necessary to keep them safe within the institutions. There are, in addition, some inmates who are eligible and who are particularly vulnerable, and we're doing everything possible to expedite their appropriate release into communities. But we also want to make sure that when they are released into communities, we are able to provide them with the necessary supports in housing, in supervision, and other measures which will help them be successful in their reintegration into community. And so we are trying to strike a balance between the importance of keeping that inmate population which cannot be released safe and healthy within the institutions, and ensuring those people who would benefit from an earlier release are given full consideration in that determination.
Okay, and just another COVID-related question for the Minister. The Incident Response Group met in late January on this matter. Can you tell us whether any Canadian-produced intelligence on COVID-19 was presented at that meeting, and if so, what did it say?
Well, I can tell you the Incident Response Group was convened in January and then formed the COVID Response Committee. I serve on that committee and have attended virtually every meeting of it. And we consider all of the information that is being provided. I am not going to discuss intelligence matters, but I can tell you that all relevant information was brought before that committee and received its full consideration.
Thank you, Minister. Ceci me fait à la conférence de presse. Merci.